Welcome to a special live edition of The Game. I'm Mark Simon. My partner, Bob Marks, is on assignment, which is to say he's on vacation in Hawaii and actually was smart enough not to come here just to do this. I am joined, of course, by our producer, Frank Bravo, who is behind the scenes and making all of this work better than I ever could. We're going to talk tonight about the election on Measure A. Polls have just closed a few minutes ago, and we should be within about 10 minutes getting the first big slug of results. It should tell us a great deal about how this election went. Just to review, and as we get ready for a night of guests, we have invited guests from both sides of this issue. The guests on the no side have not responded. So if it seems one-sided, it's not for lack of effort on our part. This began basically within a year after the sheriff, Christina Corpus, took office. She won a surprisingly strong upset over incumbent Carlos Bolanos. She had widespread support within the political community. People like Congressman Kevin Mullen had endorsed her, and quite a number of other people, the Democratic Party. She did very, very well, had a broad base of support, and there was a lot of antipathy toward Carlos Bolanos. A lot of people feel good about electing the first Latina to be our sheriff and basically usher in a new era. But within months, complaints began to mount, largely focused on Victor Aine, who is her chief of staff. She named him chief of staff. He had been a reserve deputy, which is a volunteer position, for many, many years, over 20 years. But most of his professional experience was as a real estate agent. And she essentially put him in charge of the administration of the office, which included some well-qualified other people in the office, an undersheriff named Chris Young, an assistant sheriff named Ryan Monahan, who were recruited from other departments. And they were brought in because of their professional credentials, which were impeccable. But Ryan Monahan ultimately was fired after he cooperated with an investigation we'll talk about in a minute or two. Chris Young resigned, and it was clear that a lot of the complaints that began to emanate from the office were focused on the management style of Victor Aine and the amount of power that had been ceded to him by Sheriff Corpus. Within a fairly short period of time, the complaints got to the point where the Board of Supervisors and the county hired a retired judge, Ladoris Cordell, to do an inquiry into all these complaints. She issued what is now a fairly famous 400-page report, that has often been described as scathing. The main summary point in this is, and I quote from the report, lies, secrecy, intimidation, retaliation, conflicts of interest, and abuses of authority are the hallmarks of the Corpus administration. Nothing short of new leadership can save this organization that is in turmoil and its personnel demoralized. This report was issued the same day that the sheriff announced that she had arrested the head of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, Carlos Tapia, allegations that he had been engaging in fraudulent behavior with his timesheets. An investigation into that by the district attorney's office concluded that there was no basis for the arrest, which was made without a warrant. He still remains on suspension and is now the object of an internal investigation that Sheriff Corpus has launched. Within a fairly rapid period of time after this report came out, the Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to call upon Corpus to resign. She obviously chose not to do so. And then shortly after that, put on the ballot the matter that comes to fruition today, Measure A. Measure A essentially is an amendment to the county charter, which allows the Board of Supervisors to hold a hearing and gives them the authority to fire the sheriff if she is in violation of a series of conditions that are built into the charter amendment. It's a temporary charter amendment. It expires in 2028 when Sheriff Corpus's current term expires, and the board has to hold a hearing. It has to be 4 votes out of the 5 five-member board, I should say, and that's we're waiting now to find out. We're just a few moments away from finding out the first slug of ballots and what that means. I have looked earlier today, and as of March 3rd, the turnout on this measure was 19%. I think some people were hoping that it would be as high as 30. Maybe it will be. This is a preliminary number, so it doesn't mean that much. Corpus was elected in 2022. She got 56.9% of the vote, 82,622 votes. It's clear, even if the turnout is up to 30%, that the number of people who will vote in this special Measure A election will be substantially lower than that. And she has been arguing, as have opponents of Measure A, that this is a circumvention of the voters' voice, even though it's a direct vote by the voters. So with that sort of background, we have a couple of people waiting to come on. Let's start, if we can, Frank, with Jon Mays, the editor of the San Mateo Daily Journal. The Daily Journal has been writing extensively about this, as you would imagine.
Hey, how's it going?
For John to... It was busy night, although as elections come and go, this one is not the busiest, I suppose.
We did get a pizza, though. We got a pizza for election night. So
well, that is the tradition, right?
Right. Even though there's not a full news staff here.
John, you've been writing about politics and government and elections in this county for quite a long time. Give us your sense of how unprecedented is this? Is this something that we've really just never seen before in San Mateo County?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's always been, what's interesting about the sheriff's office is that ever since Don Horsley left the office, there's been a string of sort of concerns that have come out of that office. But nothing to this extent, in which every elected official, all of the command staff, the sheriff's sergeants and the deputies all have no confidence in an elected official, right? So I think having an elected official being ousted by other elected officials locally is certainly new. There's been some recall efforts. There's been two successful ones, Herb Perez in Foster City and Maurice Goodman and Angelina Cahalan in Millbrae recently. So there is we've seen recalls done in other areas of the Bay Area in recent years, and it's a relatively new tactic. But this is something different. It's not a recall, first of all, but second, it's sort of done in a way that is surprising, I think, to a lot of the people who supported Christina early on, to see sort of the morale unravel in this way.
Is it? There are people, the opponents, who say that it should have gone ahead and done a recall. I know you've written in an editorial that this is essentially a referendum on the sheriff. And yes, it may technically not be a recall, but it also may be the way that the county can act more swiftly to remove it. Right.
Well, one of the arguments is, don't let don't let them take away your vote. But this is a vote. This is the chance to sort of say it. This is the quickest mechanism that they had. I said in the editorial that there might be room for a change in policy, that a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors might be able to have an expedited recall election in the future. I think that would be worthwhile for one of our local legislators to pursue. But it is a recall would take more time, and I think that people were looking at doing something sooner rather than later.
Okay, we do have the first set of results that have been posted by the San Mateo County Elections Office. As you can see, the turnout is slightly below 20%. The yes vote is 85.6%. The no vote, 14.4%, rounding up. We know there are more ballots to be counted, and by about 9 o'clock, they will issue the votes that were turned in at the voting centers throughout the county as they come in. And that could change the numbers. But John, based on your own experience, the yes vote, 75 141. I mentioned in the open of the show that she got 82,622 votes in 2022. So this isn't that far off from the number of votes. What's your first reaction to this, John?
I mean, it's I was thinking that it's pretty definitive. It's pretty definitive. The only higher vote count I've ever seen than this would be the vote in Burlingame to rebuild Mills Peninsula Healthcare Center in Burlingame at no cost to voters, and that got 95%. So this is pretty definitive. I think the result will stand. I usually, this is the vote by mail. This is the bulk of it.
Right.
People voting today at the voting centers, there's only one thing to circle. So people are just going to do this at home. I think this is definitely it. There might be some trickling in, but this is the result that this is it. 85.61. It might go down to 80 or something like that, but it's pretty definitive overall.
Well, yeah, I mean, the math is very simple. To turn this around, she basically has to get 100%. And there, as your point, there may not be enough votes out there for her to get enough to catch up, even if she got 100% of the votes.
I mean, I think you have to kind of turn the page now and sort of consider what's next, as far as the, we have to wait for this to be certified, and then you have to have the board have their process, and then figure out who's the next sheriff will be.
To that end, we're going to bring in now Charles Stone, former Belmont mayor, an attorney who's actually involved. Hi, Charles. In a lot of this issue, representing some of the people who have filed claims against the county. So we'll mention that in full disclosure. And I guess it doesn't hurt your feelings any that anybody who wants to file a claim knows where somebody they can call. But let's talk a little bit about, first of all, what's your reaction to the results, Charles?
So, hi, Mark. Hi, John.
Hey.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised how high it was. I thought that it would pass. I thought it would pass with no problems. But I talked to more than a few people who had bought into some of the concerns opponents had voiced about taking the power away from the people somehow. And even though I didn't agree with those concerns at all, I was a little shocked that some people really profoundly believed that it was a problem. So I thought it might be 65%, but this is resounding. As John said, I can't remember anything like this. I hadn't remembered the Peninsula Healthcare District one that John remembered, but that doesn't surprise me. This is unusual for anywhere, certainly San Mateo County.
John, why do you think it's so high? I mean, there's a whole bunch of political analysis in this kind of election, this kind of turnout. But I mean, the message here is kind of unequivocal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the result sort of mirrors, it's less than the vote of no confidence by the deputy sheriffs and the sheriff sergeants and support staff and elected officials, because that was basically unanimous. So it shows, I think the 15% is kind of that crowd in San Mateo County who will vote no on things. That's basically it. So I think it's pretty strong. If you read the stories that we've written and others have written, even some of the stories on TV news, it's pretty damning. And if you read the Cordell report, I don't know how many voters read the Cordell report, but if you take the time to read the 80 pages of the Cordell report, the first 80 or 120, I think it is, you get an idea of how the sheriff just really has lost the department overall, and a change is needed. So I think that's what voters saw, and that's what they decided to do.
John, thank you for your time. We know you're on deadline and busy. We're going to let you go, but thanks for dropping in on the game tonight.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks very much. Good luck with the rest of the podcast.
Thanks.
See you, John.
All right.
So Charles, let's talk politics first a little bit. I had thought all along that this would be a very tough election for the sheriff to win. It's an off-year election, off year. if it was combined with a general election of some kind or another, it might be a different sort of thing. But you could expect the turnout to be very low. That tends to tilt toward turnout that's fairly conservative, well entrenched, and well informed. I think you and I and quite a number of people heard a lot of people from the no side. One of the people who commented just now on YouTube called it an abuse of power. I'm not sure if they're referring to the charter amendment or the sheriff, but there were a lot of people who thought they should have done a recall. This was the wrong way to do it, that it was in fact negating the voters' opportunity to weigh in on this as they had weighed in on 2022. But the fact is that politically, it seems like the gap, the deck was stacked sort of against the sheriff having a chance to succeed at this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember an issue or candidate that has united a more diverse and vast group of San Mateo County thought leaders and elected officials than Measure A. I mean, if you look at just the people who signed the ballot argument in favor of Measure A, it's Anna Eshoo, it's Kevin Mullen, it's Diane Pappin. The list of people, the list of councils that were willing to kind of go outside their usual practice of kind of avoiding weighing in on regional issues formally, that were willing to actually step up and either have a vote of no confidence or a vote in favor of Measure A. I can't remember anything else like that in recent history that kind of just had that momentum. And I think what the chord that was struck with people of San Mateo County is nobody likes abuses of power and nobody likes a corruption charge. That cuts across political lines. I will say that it'll be interesting to see how the later ballots break. I have some suspicions that the gap may narrow a little bit. It's not going to narrow enough to matter at all, but later voters tend to be a little different in this county, in my experience. So it'll be very interesting to see how those folks vote.
We have Jerry Hill standing by. Frank, perhaps we can bring him on now, get his reaction.
Actually, Jerry stepped away for a minute, so
we stepped away. We'll have Jerry on in a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about Charles. I asked you before we even came on the air, I asked you to look into what happens next. And I know it's a complicated question that we'll talk about probably throughout the evening. But of course, the first step is that the county has to certify the election, and that can take as many as 30 days. I don't know if the board can act. Can they act without the election being officially certified?
I don't think they will. I would imagine that they could take some steps that might be helpful. For instance, a process needs to be defined as to how this is going to be handled. That hasn't happened yet. And I think once we're through this week, for instance, we'll have a very good idea of what the result is going to be. And I would hope that the board could act swiftly then and start working on defining a process for how hearings may or may not be held, how many hearings will be held. And so that's step one. And I'm hoping that those two things, the certification and the definition of the process, can happen at once. I think when we see an overwhelming result like this, the voters have spoken. And I think that that's going to be encouraging to the board and will hopefully help them feel that they have the will of the people behind them as they go forward. After the process is defined, there's probably going to have to be some sort of hearings that are held. You look through the language of the measure, and there are certain things that can qualify as removing the sheriff for cause, which the measure says you have to have cause to remove the sheriff. And one of the interesting things is Sheriff Corpus has repeatedly made charges of bias against several supervisors, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear those charges of bias. And it might be helpful, and I can't claim to be a complete expert in this area, but it seems to me there might be room for the board to appoint maybe some sort of an independent fact finder, an administrative law judge that could do the investigation and present findings of fact and a recommendation to the board. And that might insulate the board from any charges of bias.
Okay, we're going to get into that more as the evening wears on. Charles has agreed to stick around for a while, but I understand we are now joined by Jerry Hill, former state senator and co-chair of the committee that has been formed with Jim Hartnett, the former mayor of Redwood City, the committee to recall Sheriff Corpus. You obviously, Jerry, first of all, what's your reaction to the results we've seen so far?
Well, thank you, Mark, and hi, Charles. It's nice to see you.
Hey, Jerry, always great to see you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm really gratified, and with the voters that they saw exactly what most of us saw. I mean, when you take the civic leaders who are supporting the amendment, when you look at all the people who are behind her, those same people, very same people who were supporting her when she ran, they saw the difference. They saw what has occurred over the last couple of years, and they weren't happy about it. So it's very encouraging to see this, and to see that the voters and the people that are concerned about San Mateo County want to see a change, and they want to see it, I think, sooner rather than later. And that's why they supported this amendment on the ballot, because time is really important. I mean, and I think the board needs to act as soon as possible. They will certainly do their due diligence and abide by the law to make sure that they follow the procedures that are necessary that Charles outlined. But I think it's critical that we make some changes, because as I'm concerned, that I mean, public safety is really at risk, and that is where, fortunately, I mean, we have not seen any challenges or any tragedies that could require some quick action on the part of the sheriff's department, but I'm worried that will happen, and when it does, we could lose lives. So that's why it's imperative that we move quickly with this, and I guess the concern for us, and especially the co-chair Jim Hartnett, who is the co-chair of the recall committee, as we watch the procedure and the process go forward, the concern is that how she will react. I mean, certainly, I think, looking at these results, she should resign and save the county and the people and the residents of San Mateo County the struggle that will go forward. And it's how if she supports and goes forward and works with the board in a way that will have hearings that are responsible, or if she just decides to disrupt those hearings. I mean, that's the other part. And I think the committee that we have put together for the recall is watching, and we will be watching very closely to see how that works out. Because a recall versus this vote is certainly a long process, and it's a very structured process that's defined by law. But most importantly, there's a finite amount of time in a recall. You have X number of days to collect the signatures, X number of days to file the paperwork, and then X number of days to have the vote. And we want to start that clock at the appropriate time, or to give us enough time to really bring it forward to the voters. And so we'll be watching very carefully what happens in the next month or two, and how the board and how the sheriff reacts and acts to this to the amendment, and how they go forward with it.
So a recall is not off the table. You guys are going to remain organized. You haven't been doing much, and understandably, there's another measure on the ballot. You were waiting to see what happens. Why wouldn't this be enough to convince you don't need to do a recall?
Well, it's not enough, because what we've seen and what we've heard from the sheriff is that her intention to fight this, and she may fight this in court, just as she brought legal action to prevent the election from moving forward. We think that she will probably do that as well with regards to the Board of Supervisors taking their action and moving forward. So if she does that, then we want to make sure that we're ready for that, that we're the backstop, that we will be ready to move forward and to try to go through that process, that long process. I mean, it will take a year for us to bring that to the voters, to ask for that question, and it'd be good to not have to do that, but we're certainly prepared to do it, because it's important, so important for this county that we have a new sheriff, and that someone that can respect the law and move this county forward.
The principal argument against Measure A, and we all heard from people, I think it made some people very nervous, because you both are experienced in the public forum. My experience is the no side tends to be louder, even if they're smaller. And they made a lot of noise. There were a lot of postings pretty consistently from people saying they should have done a recall all along. that was a reflection of the kind of election she faced in 2022. It was a straight up or down vote. Do you think there was a mistake? Because there will be legal challenges to this that would not have occurred if a recall had happened. Do you think it was a mistake to go with this county charter amendment instead of a recall, Jerry?
No, I don't think it was a mistake. I think the recall will take, as I mentioned, at least a year for it to go from starting to collect the signatures, filing those initial signatures of voters, registered voters in the county, and then collecting the signatures will take a year. We really don't have that time. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm concerned about that next disaster that hits San Mateo County and the need for effective, honest leadership in the sheriff's office. So I think, and the reason we've been sitting back during this time is we didn't want to confuse the voters. We wanted the voters to be able to, I could just see it as a voter myself. If I voted already, or if I signed the petition for a recall, and someone asks you to do something, I say, well, I already did that. Didn't I already do that? And I think that would create some confusion. So we kind of stepped back to wait and see the results, which are overwhelming tonight, to show that the interests of the residents of this county is really, I think, where we want to be. So I don't think we could have, it should have, because that election would not be, even if we had started early or in this, the election wouldn't be till probably November at the earliest of this year.
Can I tack onto that, Mark?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just echo that and thank Jerry and Jim Hartnett for being willing to work so hard on this, because I think in a situation like this, where you have the type of allegations that we're seeing in the Cordell report about conflicts of interest, about abuses of power, stories I've heard about retaliation against the good women and men of the San Mateo County Sheriff's Department, you need a belt and suspenders approach. We all hope that this goes extraordinarily well from here out and that it's an expedited process as fast as it can be legally. We all hope that the sheriff would do the right thing and respect the will of the people and step down, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think she said as much in an interview last night, that she intends to fight. And I suspect she'll make use of the courts again. I don't think she'll be successful. I hope she's not. But as long as she's in that position, you're going to see, I think, more and more people walk away from that office. And it's an office that already had staffing problems. And this is a huge enterprise. I don't think people understand how much of the county the sheriff's office covers and the support services that they provide to even the local police departments. We can't have some sort of a crisis situation happen and have had 40% of the department resign or walk away or retire because they refuse to work under this sheriff. We simply can't have that. So the belt and suspenders approach of making sure that one or the other of these approaches will work was the only way I think we could do this.
It should be noted, somewhere in the neighborhood of 160-something% of the sheriff's staff have resigned since Sheriff Corpus took office. Now, some of them were going to retire, some of them were going to move on to other jobs, but still, the sheriff has made quite a show of having filled a great number of those vacancies. But as was ably reported by Anna Mata in the San Mateo Daily Journal, it just about evens out, that the shortfall in personnel that existed when she took office exists to the same extent now. She has brought in new people, most of whom are still being trained, many of whom will not stay. They'll wash out for one reason or another. But the crisis about hiring remains a real problem there. Jerry, you're a former member of the Board of Supervisors. If you were on the board now, what would you be doing tomorrow? What would you be telling your colleagues to do tomorrow?
Well, the main message to me is we have to get started. So we need to have a blueprint and a plan going forward that with really an expedited plan to make sure that we can, without shortcutting, but to make sure that we cover all the bases and start the process to do this. I mean, there were a lot of questions, as we all heard, that, recall is the way we should go. That's what the voters want. And you can't change this. This is law that about recalling or removing an elected official. But, the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County is a charter county. So, I mean, the charter is our constitution, and really the voters can change that constitution. And they did, and they are voting today to make a decision on the sheriff and moving forward. So I think the board needs to start working to try to make the case to basically themselves in a fair and responsible manner, bring forth the evidence, and then have the vote. But hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later would be my goal, and that's where I would be pushing it. Charles,
let's talk about that a little bit. Starting with, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you are representing people who have, from the sheriff's office, who have filed claims against the county, which is the first step in filing a lawsuit. Well, one of the things I wonder about is however long it takes for the board to act, and we could be looking at mid to late summer before they maybe even hold hearings or certainly make any judgment. So we're talking about several months, or at least a few months. How fearful are some of the sheriff's staff going to be that in the meantime, the sheriff is not only going to be defiant about resigning, but also determined to retaliate against those she thinks have somehow betrayed her?
I would say that the concerns are great and widely held, and for good reason. I think that as time passes, what will come out is a pattern, a clear pattern of retaliation. We've already seen it. I mean, the fact that one of her political opponents was arrested in, shall we say, dubious circumstances, and it certainly appears without using the proper methods and without probable cause. And that person has...
Just to explain to people, this is Carlos Tapia, who was president of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. He was the point man on the complaints from his union membership about what was going on in the sheriff's office. And the very day, in fact, just minutes before the board released the Cordell report, they announced his arrest. And it's always struck me, just from a political perspective, mind-boggling that in the midst of accusations that you engage in retaliation, you turn around and arrest somebody. And the DA's office negated the arrest, said that there was no basis for it. And now he's subject to internal investigation and is actually on suspension waiting for this to be done. But go ahead and make your point. I just wanted to make sure people understood who you were referring to.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate the context. And my point is simply that there is certainly very compelling evidence out there already that this is a sheriff has behaved in a retaliatory manner. And based on statements she's made in the public, it certainly sounds like she doesn't plan to go anywhere. And I believe that the women and men of the sheriff's department have very real concerns that many of them are going to be subjects of further retaliation. For instance, I'll tell you that it's no secret that there was a press conference held a few weeks ago. And very shortly after that press conference, some individuals who showed up at the press conference, who were members of the unions, were reassigned in a way that had never been done before, in a complete deviation from protocol and procedure. And, you know, people can draw the conclusions they want from that, but certainly given the context, it doesn't look good for the sheriff. And it's really unfair too, because these women and men have every right to speak out about what they see as abuses of power, and they have every right to exercise their First Amendment rights insofar as Measure A goes. And to do things in such close conjunction, Mark, again, kind of mystifies me. If you're being accused of retaliatory behavior, it just boggles my mind that you would continue to behave in ways that could certainly be construed as retaliatory.
Let's talk a little bit more about the next steps for the board. Let's assume that they wait until the election has been certified, which would make a lot of sense, even though it means time. There are a couple of concerns. One is that some of the board members are on the record as calling for the sheriff to resign. Some of them endorsed Measure A. Based on her behavior up to now, the sheriff has already filed at least one lawsuit. We expect more to come. And the question is, what does the board have to do to establish that this process is credible? Charles, you first, and then Jerry, if you could respond to that as well.
Sure. Well, the board will be acting in a quasi-judicial role, something that both Jerry and I have done as council members, and Jerry in other roles, and that requires that they be impartial. And the case law around bias is rich with examples of financial interests, obviously, and that's not something that's going to play a role here. The question is, do statements by certain supervisors about asking the sheriff to resign, or accusations that she's been less than truthful about circumstances in which she terminated the assistant sheriff, for instance, those may be real questions, but as I alluded to earlier, and I'm not an expert, although I know a little bit about this, I wonder if the board can't appoint an independent fact finder or administrative law judge to conduct the investigation, make findings of fact, and then bring a recommendation forward. That might insulate the board from these charges. That assumes that that some sort of a bias that would matter could be proven, and I'm not even sure that's going to be the case. What's important in hearings like this is that you can walk into the hearing and hear the evidence without bias. Most of the evidence is out there, I think. There may be some new things that develop, but this isn't going to be new stuff that's presented. And I strongly suspect that all 5 of the members of the Board of Supervisors could sit without bias and make a decision on this. Obviously, they're going to rely on the county attorney's office, and the county attorney's office is going to advise them whether or not they think they can, and they'll move forward from there. But I'm really hopeful that there's a way forward that's fast, whether it's all 5 of them sitting, or whether it's the appointment of some sort of independent fact finder. I think the most important thing for the county and the women and the men of the sheriff's department is that this happen in an expedited fashion. That's one concern. The other is in a way that survives a challenge in the courts. So you're going to have competing tensions between those 2 goals, and that's the rub.
Jerry, if you were on the board, would you want the board to sit as the quasi-judicial body, or would you look for an independent sort of investigation? And I guess the question is, why doesn't the Cordell report qualify as that already?
Well, I think that and Charles explained that perfectly, that the challenge of a board or a council or whatever agency you're working under or elected to be part of, you have to take sometimes those quasi-judicial positions and make decisions related to that. And I think, as I've always done, is you kind of divorce yourself of the issue at the time that you're going through the fact finding, just as you would as a juror. And I believe you can do that. I mean, I've been able to do that in the past and start from scratch and listen to the evidence and make a decision based on whatever my personal opinion was before. Now, whether that stands up in court as an independent or a rehabilitated elected official to make that decision, I don't know. But I think it's certainly possible for all of them to listen to the evidence and move forward and make a valid, fair, honest decision on that without prejudice. But whether that'll stand up, that's the question. And I think Charles's idea of an independent person, I think, is to do the fact finding and present that with an opinion is a very good approach that they may look at, I would think.
Charles, didn't we do that already? Wasn't that what the Cordell report was supposed to be?
To some extent, absolutely. But I think when you look at the language of the measure,
right.
I think that the board is going to be expected to hold some hearings and listen to some evidence, whether that's simply retired Judge Cordell presenting what she found or not. I don't know, but are they expecting witnesses to be sworn, for instance? That would be something that, there's a due process concern is I guess what I'm getting at, right? And if there's one thing I learned in government, I'm sure Jerry did as well, it's that nobody's more cautious than a public entity attorney. They are some of the most cautious people in the world. And so I can't speak to it for sure, but I would be shocked if the county attorney's office isn't going to give advice that is calculated to protect against not the 1 out of 10 risk, but the 1 out of 100 risk. And so they're going to want to have this thing buttoned up such that it sticks in court. And so they may want to give the sheriff the opportunity to come give sworn testimony in order to protect against concerns in the future that the court may say, hey, you didn't follow due process. She didn't have a chance to confront her accusers and present her side of the issues. I think that the board's probably going to want to do that to make sure that we don't end up, to me, after such an outpouring of support for this measure, the worst possible case scenario would be if the board handled this in such a way that it got overturned in court. Now, thankfully, we would have Jerry and Jim Hartnett waiting in the background to move forward with the belt or the suspenders, whichever one you want to make them out to be, and try to get that recall on. But again, as Jerry said, there are timing rules around that, and it's a sprint. It's a sprint. It's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of money. We certainly don't want to have to do that if we don't have to. So I strongly suspect that the board is going to want to give her an opportunity to come forward, take the oath, and give testimony under penalty of perjury. Whether or not she'll do that, I think will speak volumes about how much she really believes in the strength of her case. For instance, if she's given the opportunity to give sworn testimony and declines to do so, well, we all know, you're not supposed to use the Fifth Amendment against anyone, but I think in the court of public opinion, that's going to speak volumes.
Well, we do know the Board of Supervisors has subpoena power, and I know there are at least one or two members of the board who are eager to use it in this context. And one of the knocks on the Cordell report is that the information she gathered was not sworn testimony. The great bulk of it was anonymous. In fact, the only one we all know participated without being anonymous was Assistant Sheriff Ryan Monahan, and the result of that was that the sheriff fired him.
Right.
And Mike Callaghy had to reinstate him in anticipation of potential lawsuits, and that really precipitated a lot of the high-profile nature of this crisis. So the question then is, Charles, and this is an unfair question, but I'll go ahead and ask it. What's your best assessment of whether or not this can survive a legal challenge, this actual vote on Measure A, and whether or not it was a legal process?
So first off, this is not novel ground, and that's not unusual for San Mateo County, as we all know. San Mateo County rarely likes to be the first county to do something. San Francisco, Los Angeles County, and I believe San Bernardino County all have the same or very similar processes in place for removing a sheriff. And there was a legal challenge back in 2005 in San Bernardino County, January 2005. The case is called Penrod, and people brought this argument that this was not constitutional because it wasn't held in the right part of the cycle, right? We've heard that argument here as well, that this needed to be done in a general election. And that argument and other arguments they made were swatted down by the appellate court. So there's no certainties in the law. I always tell clients that, but it would be unusual to me if this didn't survive that same legal challenge up here. The bias issues will certainly, she's made it very clear, she's going to go that route as well. That's a little bit different. That's not addressed in that decision, but there's a vast body of case law out there addressing what sorts of things have to be proven to achieve success on a bias argument. And I have every confidence that the county attorney's office is very familiar with all those cases and is going to instruct the board to proceed in a way that insulates them from liability for any bias as well. So I guess if you're asking me for an assessment, I'll give you a 75, 80% chance that this survives any legal challenge.
Jerry, let's talk a little bit about, go ahead, Jerry.
No, I was just going to say, Mark, that I think Charles is right that San Mateo County sometimes is not on the cutting edge being out there in front, but when they do take on a case or an issue, it is research. The county counsel's office is superb, excellent, extremely professional and knowledgeable in doing it the right way. So if they're taking kind of experience or directions from those previous cases, I think they're going to be able to do it in a way that will certainly withstand some of those legal challenges that will come forward, because they are so professional and so thoughtful in these approaches. And I think really in a short while, they may wait until the election is certified, but I think they will immediately have a process in place that they have analyzed, studied, and looked at the past history of some of those cases to define what the role and what the process should be.
And it looks like we might have lost Mark's internet there. So we'll give
Jerry,
him
you
a
and I are
second
going
to
to
come
have to
back.
soft shoe it.
We'll do it. So
There you go.
So Jerry, talk about what kind of support you've gotten for the recall, even though you guys haven't been doing a lot. How are you feeling about it if it has to go forward?
Well, I mean, the best part is everyone we've asked for support, and whether that's financial support, and we haven't asked many because our financial responsibility at this point and obligations and revenue necessity is limited. But all it takes is a phone call, and the checks keep coming. So that has not been a problem, and we see that people are very receptive to the idea of moving forward with a recall if necessary, or if we feel that we have to do it. And I think that's the best part. And I think you're belt and suspenders. I'd rather be the belt than the suspenders, frankly. But either way, I think it's really, I mean, an approach that we looked at from the beginning, because we didn't want to tie all of this around one particular process that could be questioned or challenged in some form. We know a recall, the process is legal. And we will do that if necessary to make sure that we get the results and get public safety back where it should be in San Mateo County.
So,
I
so
certainly
Mark is
agree.
in the process of restarting his computer because it has frozen, and I think he is just joining us back right now. But the live broadcasts are always a fun thing, and you never quite know what you're gonna meet. So here's Mark back.
Well,
Welcome back, Mark.
Oh, Mark, thanks. It's
Thanks
Charles
for
and
joining.
Jerry's show now. Sorry.
Without me, Charles and Jerry ought to just say, "Welcome to the game. I'm Charles and I'm Jerry." And
Yeah,
leave Bob and me out
I
of this.
almost said that.
Jerry, let me ask you this, because in 2022, Christina Corpus was elected, as I've mentioned before, with almost 57% of the vote, a substantial victory. In fact, it was much larger than I thought, to the point where I had to eat my column, although I made a cake out of it. And notice I've never done that again. But 82,000 votes. I mean, it wasn't a landslide, but it was an unquestionable victory over a well-entrenched incumbent. She took office with a lot of hope. A lot of people, as Charles has alluded to, key political leaders in this county supported her running. They were sort of happy at the idea of a fresh new face, a younger Latina serving. She hired some good people from other departments who seemed to have a lot of credibility and a lot of experience. But then she also hired Victor Aine and gave him a huge amount of power. But where do you think things went off the rails? Because this, as I wrote in a was someone who just 3 years ago was immensely popular and about whom there was a great deal of hope.
Well, to me, it as you watch it from the beginning and that great amount of support that she received, and the I think the mandate. I mean, it really was from many years of a sheriff that incumbency was always just the next election away, and they would keep moving forward. But I think what happened, and frankly, you mentioned it. I think she's been manipulated. I think she has taken advice from someone who did not have and does not have her best interests at heart, and nor the best interests of the sheriff's department and the county. And I think that's really what has happened. If you if you take advice or listen to someone consistently kind of leading you down a path and trying to convince, and in some cases successfully convincing, that that's the way you should be operating and running your department, and you are the boss no matter what, I think we're seeing the results of that. And I think it's sad, because it didn't have to be that way. And I think that's really what the problem is that we've seen, and that's where the direction changed, was from that point on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't support Sheriff Corpus. There's no secret of that. And but I was hopeful that things would go well, especially when, think we lost Mark again. I was hopeful, especially when she surrounded herself with some extraordinary local leaders
Right.
who were very well thought of, folks with great reputations to serve on her executive team. And then I got very concerned when both of those folks were gone within a matter of months under questionable circumstances as to where she was getting her advice and who she was listening to. And it became pretty clear, I think, to those of us that were paying attention, that she wasn't listening to the experts in law enforcement. She was listening to somebody who had very little in the way of actual concrete law enforcement expertise, law enforcement management expertise. And, you know, there's also, I think, in the background of all of this, if we're being fully honest, the experience of running the Millbrae Police Department essentially as the contract entity for the Millbrae law enforcement is a lot different than running the entire sheriff's department. Millbrae is a tiny town, no disrespect to Millbrae, small town. Its problems are very different from a lot of the county, and it's only, you know, so many sworn personnel. I would hazard a guess it's probably 20-25 sworn personnel, if that. The sheriff's department is corrections, hundreds of sworn personnel, all kinds of administrative stuff, dealing with the board of supervisors, the county executive. And I do wonder how much of this has to do with the sheriff hadn't had much direct experience with that level, and maybe that may have made her more susceptible to manipulation.
Right. I would agree with that, Charles, because I think we can see that you know, her level of experience was not related to the jail or to the courts or to the range or all of the other things that you have to deal with, the civil aspects in the sheriff's office. And I think that when you don't know, and then you don't rely on those who do know, and you take advice from someone who doesn't know, you run into problems. And I think that's exactly what occurred. And it took her down a path that once it started, and I think that's really the indicator, once she started seeing problems, it's almost like you double down on that. And that's what she kept doing and doing and doing, rather than looking at seeing where she could improve, or did I make a mistake here? Should I be going in a different direction? What can I learn from this? She was taking that strong defensive position and basically saying, I'm right, you're wrong, and then retaliate or do whatever she can to eliminate that negativity within her office that had the real thoughtful problem solving aspects of it, rather than I believe the power hungry or power grabbing influence that she saw. So
Jerry and Charles, Mark is back again, I think. At
Mark,
least for
nice
now.
to see you.
We were going to take a break, but with Mark being back, we'll go ahead and let him continue on here. But I did want to remind people to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast if you're enjoying it. And if you're not enjoying it, still subscribe, please. And make sure you do that on your favorite podcast platform or here on YouTube if you're watching live on YouTube. So, Mark, back to you.
For reasons that have nothing to do with Jerry and Charles, I'm not exactly enjoying this experience right now. Jerry, thank you for being with us. We're going to let you go. Charles is going to stick around and have some more comments as the evening unfolds. But Jerry, thank you very much for being with us. We are now joined by Eliot Storch from the Deputy Sheriff's Association, which was the main entity backing the Measure A campaign, the campaign to remove a corrupt sheriff or something. I know the word corrupt was in the name of the committee.
Law enforcement against corruption.
There you go. I knew it was something like that. Congratulations, I guess. Are you surprised at the size of the margin here?
Yeah. But more so grateful than surprised. I really think this shows just how we were able to get our message out and how much the community supported us and heard what we had to say and heard our fears and concerns and turned out and supported us. I am extremely grateful. I know the rest of the DSA board is grateful, and I'm sure the people who work in this agency are very grateful for that.
What's your best guess? The calls for her to resign will continue to mount now in the face of this election result. You've been campaigning against her. I know from prior shows you haven't had a great deal of interaction directly with her or with her chief of staff, Victor Anye. But based on your own political experience in this campaign, what are the chances you think she might choose to resign?
I unfortunately don't know. I think every time we've tried to predict something, we've guessed wrong. I don't think any of us would have predicted that she would have had President Tapia arrested. I don't think any of us predicted she would try and name Victor INJ as assistant sheriff at a pretty wild board of supervisors meeting. So I'm not even sure I can hazard a guess, just because there's really no predicting what Sheriff Corpus will say or do.
What's the message you think that people should take away from this election?
I think the message is that the people of this county know what they want in a sheriff. They want a sheriff who they can trust. They want a sheriff who is not committing these abuses, who's not using racist and homophobic language, who's not, committing labor law violations, and that they want someone who is accountable to them. And I think what these results shown, and obviously, these are not the final results, there's still more ballots to be counted, but what these preliminary results have shown is that they very strongly support a campaign to remove a sheriff who is committing all these violations and causing all these problems. I think that's the big takeaway, is that they support accountability.
If the sheriff is removed, we're talking about this, Charles has been helping us and throughout the evening, it will be months before this happens. It's going to be quite a while, and it's going to be quite a process that the board hasn't settled on. The board has never done this before. They're going to have to make it up as they go. How much apprehension, how much fear will there be that in the interim, the sheriff will take this opportunity to retaliate against people like yourself who have chosen to take a high-profile role in this campaign?
There is a significant amount of fear. I think every minute that Sheriff Corpus remains in power is another minute that somebody is going to be retaliated against. Somebody is at risk of, these kinds of abuses that she's been committing. It's very real. Our hope, I having not spoken with any members of the board of supervisors, I don't know what their timeline is specifically. I don't know what their plan is, but I hope at the very least from a public safety perspective, given how hard it's been to recruit and retain and how stressful this has all been on the people in this agency, that the board of supervisors will see that and understand that the faster this process goes, respecting everyone's rights, of course, but that the faster this process goes, the better it's going to be for the people who work in this agency and for the residents of this county. So our hope is that it's not months. Our hope is that it's faster, and ultimately that's up to the board of supervisors. But we hope that, with what they've heard from us throughout these last several months, and that from what they heard tonight from the voters, that they will be able to get this done and this county can move forward with a positive aspect of public safety rather than all of these negatives.
The sheriff's office has broad responsibilities. Maybe the most substantial is that they are the official jail for the entire county, in addition to patrol, in addition to serving in the courts, and a host of other activities, as well as operating as a police department in a number of cities. Is the sheriff's office staffed and operating at an unsafe level now?
I wouldn't say we're at an unsafe level, and I think that is a credit to the people who are working and dedicating so much of their time and working overtime. But as we've said before, we're not sure how long that can last. We're not sure how long people can continue to work at the level that they're working. Burnout is a real thing in this profession, and even more so when there's so much stress and such a lack of leadership coming from the top. And that's another thing that I think is important for the board of supervisors to hear and understand, is that the faster that Sheriff Corpus leaves, the faster that she is removed, resigns, however it happens, the sooner we can get back to recruiting, retaining, getting top talent back at this agency, and getting staffing levels up to a point where people aren't having to work so much overtime and aren't having to devote so much of their lives to keeping everything running.
So it's a night, I suppose, for celebration, but there's an undercurrent of fear, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to make sure that we're able to start rebuilding this agency and start moving forward as soon as possible. And we're also very concerned that Sheriff Corpus is going to use this as an opportunity to retaliate against people. It's extremely concerning. If anything, the fact that the numbers are what they are makes it a little more concerning, because at this point, I'm concerned she might take the opinion that she has nothing to lose, so she might as well try and burn this place down on her way out, and it's very concerning.
Well, just for the sake of the permanent record, when you say burn this place down, you don't mean literally, do you?
No, not literally. Well, I hope not literally. Like I said before, we can't predict everything that's happening, but no, I think she might use it as an opportunity to really retaliate and really mistreat the people who have been vocally against her and the people who have not lined up behind her.
We haven't heard from the sheriff yet, at least not directly, but if you had the opportunity to speak to her directly now, what would you say to her?
I would say that for someone who has worked in law enforcement for so long, she needs to understand that the most important thing about being in law enforcement is being a good partner. And she has probably seen over the course of her experience good supervisors and bad supervisors. And there is nothing worse than a bad supervisor. And when the people who you are supposed to be leading do not respect you, and you do not respect them, and you treat them so poorly, it's time to go. My hope is that she's able to realize that there is no winning for her in this situation, that the residents of this county don't want her here, that the people in this agency don't want her here, and that she can avoid so much drama, and she can allow the people who have worked in this agency for so long to get back on their feet by resigning.
Deputy Eliot Storch of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, thank you for being with us, both this time and just a week ago. We'll see you again soon, I suspect, because I don't think this issue is going to go away. Certainly not as quickly as you might hope it will, but I'm sure we'll be talking about this for quite a while. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Frank, I just got notice that the County Elections Office has posted some new results. Maybe you can pull those up for us. I don't know how different they look. It's 85,000 votes yes. But that's a significant number, Charles, because as I've mentioned throughout the evening, she got 82,000 votes in the 2022 election. And one of her arguments has been, look, 82,000 residents of this county voted for me. How dare you negate that vote? I'm sorry, I'm reading these numbers wrong. It's 85%. It's 75,000. So never mind. It's like,
well, I think you can safely extrapolate at this point that she's going to see more votes to get her out than she did to put her in.
Yeah.
I don't think you're wrong.
Well, we'll see. We are now joined by a couple of people who've been waist deep in this campaign. Julie Lind from the San Mateo County Central Labor Council and John Whitehurst from BMWL consulting firm, which was the primary consultant on the Yes on A campaign. John and Julie, welcome.
Great. Thanks, Mark, for having us. Good to be here.
So Mark has been having internet problems tonight, which is the great thing about doing something live online. And it looks like he might be locked up again.
Oh, no.
So
I'm getting used to it at this point, Frank. Do you want me to keep going?
Does that mean I need to go home? Like, can I leave? Is that
you need to stay because
why are you so mean to me? I thought we were friends.
We're totally friends. I mean, you text me all the time, you know.
Whatever. You guys are so
great.
mean.
So welcome to the game with Charles Stone. We're in our second hour here, and before Julie and John continue, I just want to make sure that people realize, we've mentioned this a couple of times during the show, that we have invited the sheriff on. We have invited the No on Measure A people on as well. representatives, and they have yet to accept that. But we will continue to try as this process plays out, because we want to make sure that we're showing a fair and equal opportunity to everybody. I also, before I turn this back over to Charles, want to remind people to subscribe to the podcast or here on YouTube if you're watching live, so that you don't miss an episode, or you can visit thegamepeninsula.com for more details. So, Charles, I appreciate you stepping in as the temporary host of the game.
Thanks, Frank. So, John and Julie, first question: are you surprised by the results tonight?
I mean, look, we polled early on, and as Julie knows, we were astounded at our level of support in the beginning. But it was about 70, and the fact that we've outpolled the poll is phenomenal. It's a great testament to the work of Julie, Labor Council, and also the DSA and all the volunteers that really pitched in and went out there and campaigned. That's a good campaign effort.
Julie?
You should never take a campaign for granted, no matter what information you have, right? Like we've been burned in the past, but I had many conversations today with other folks about how are you feeling? What are you thinking about 810? And it was a centered understanding of I'm really excited, I'm really optimistic, but also I may soon vomit. So there, all of the feelings were present. So it's like every election is important, but this especially so, at least for labor, because this election was around workplace protections. It was around people being safe at work. So the results, the commitment of the community to the restoration of accountability, to the right of people to be safe at work, to have these labor protections in place, like that's really inspirational. I've had a lot of questions about some political decisions as of late, but the electorate here showing their commitment to workplace safety, to ensuring accountability, to restoring values to the individuals that offer our public safety, like that. It's exciting. Like you don't want to take it for granted, but it's also like the results came and I cried because I have all of the feelings, but it
And
was a
Julie,
lot.
like, it just affirms what we thought, right? But to have 85% in agreement. I mean, I've been running campaigns for 30 years in California, and I've never had an 85%. That means, and you figure 5% just screwed up, right? And they voted, they thought, no, they're against the sheriff instead of yes to remove the sheriff, right? So that's almost unanimous support. And you never, in today's world, with divisive politics, nationally, state, even local, this is an amazing result. The voters are speaking almost with one voice. The supervisors need to hear it. They need to not get bogged down in too much process. They need to do the process necessary and what is required. But let's get to it. The voters have spoken. You can't get any clearer than this.
That's absolutely right. For whatever it's worth, and I can't claim to know the circumstances of the Los Angeles County measure, but I did look earlier today to see how much
Champagne, by the way.
Nice.
Measure A. There you go.
If only you could share.
Here you go. Glass for you.
When Los Angeles County put this on the ballot, it passed by 71%, which I thought was an extraordinary result, right? And earlier tonight, Mark talked about how when Sheriff Corpus was elected with, I think, 57 or 58% of the vote, she felt like she had a mandate. And we're the three of us so attuned to this stuff that we see a 58%, a 60% result, and we're pretty impressed by that. At least I am usually, right? That's a pretty good win, 60%. 85% is just unheard of. It's just unheard of. So
never had it.
You two have to be feeling pretty good, and you should feel pretty good. John, you talked about it a little bit right there, and it's something Mark's been asking me about tonight. But talk a little bit more about the feelings that you're hearing in terms of the DSA and the OSS, and what you're hearing from the folks you've talked to about what comes next and what people would like to see.
I mean, because the vote was so resounding, and I could show you the media reports. There's so much media on it. There's great clarity in the county. This is not something that people are wishy-washy about. This is not something that people were like undecided and had to grapple with. People want this sheriff out. The longer she stays, the more it costs people, the more it's going to politically cost if the soups don't move with haste. I mean, it's got to go. It needs to go quickly. I think you've heard from DSA folks and their concerns, and those are big concerns, not just for personnel, but for the general safety of the county. I think you've heard from Julie about, the actual workers and the real stuff that's happening in that department. So there's a lot at stake. And you shouldn't take this lightly. I fear for the politicians if they don't move fast, because voters are one way and they're moving, and they want the politicians to move. I think that's the big message.
What's the old saying? Politics is the art of disappointing your supporters at a rate they can absorb. This is not one of those instances where you want to disappoint too much, right?
No, this is not one of those instances. No.
Julie, maybe you want to take a second to tell folks, about what the San Mateo County Central Labor Council does and how you got involved in this.
Thank you. So the Labor Council is an umbrella organization for all of the labor unions in San Mateo County. We represent 102 affiliate unions and about 95,000 members and their families countywide. And so how I got involved in this, I actually got a phone call from a colleague of mine within the labor movement who had a relationship with President Tappy and the DSA, who had reached out to me, had shared some of the challenges the office was going through. We had a conversation and we had the discussion of, okay, where to from here? But that was in maybe August. And then comes September. And for the last 6 months, we've been busy, but it has been an honor to be on. Like, it sounds performative and silly, but it's been an honor to do this by the side of these folks. Like, I think a lot of times in the politics and in the discussion around all of this and all of the salacious pieces of this ever unfolding drama, I think sometimes the people get lost. Because all of these discussions, these comments about what are the next steps, what are the legislative processes, where do we go from here administratively? These are still people every day who are saying, I'm not safe at work. These are individuals just running the gamut of all the different positions that they hold within the sheriff's office saying, I need help. I'm not okay. Things here are not okay. And we need to find a path forward. So to be able to stand behind them, to be able to work with them toward what is right, toward restoring accountability, toward creating opportunities for individuals to have these worksite protections and have them upheld, that this is at its core, this is a labor issue. This is a hostile work environment issue. This is a problem of the employer. This is corruption at the top and a group of workers saying we will not stand for this continued abuse. This is an issue of workplace safety for the labor community. That is what this is about, protecting our colleagues every day when they show up to work to protect the rest of us.
Well, I'm glad to be back with you. This is
Mark.
This is a news media member's greatest nightmare. You just went on to without me. So who needs me?
Mark, while you were gone, I opened
I
a
need
bottle
you.
of champagne.
I need
in
you
honor
deeply.
of Measure A. So
You left us with Charles. I feel
Yeah.
personally victimized by
I'm
Mark Simon.
A pale version of you. That's not.
John, I apologize if you've already talked about this, but we've talked from the beginning. You actually, we talked a little bit about some polling you did, and my guess is that this would actually outperformed that initial poll. I remember it was somewhere in the 70s, and now we're more like in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, we did mention that up top, Mark, and yes, essentially we were polling at low 70s, and to outperform by 13, 14, 15% is just outstanding. It speaks to the commitment of the volunteers and as well as labor council and everybody that went out and hustled. But also there's a collective consciousness now in the county that she needs to go, and this was the vehicle to have her go. And Julie mentions that the working conditions and all of that, there are safety conditions, but there's the umbrella issue of corruption. And corruption, voters in San Mateo cannot tolerate. And so a collective consciousness is that she has to go, and Measure A was the vehicle to have her go. And so, we're very heartened that we got so many people support and volunteer for the campaign. We're also really heartened that people kind of rallied around, the message in the vehicle. So, in 30 years, I've never had an 85% win ever. So this is a big deal. I don't know where there's an 85% in California. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, Jon Mays, the editor of the Daily Journal, was on earlier referring to a Peninsula Healthcare District ballot measure in Burlingame in the area, the Measure V, and that got 92% of the vote.
Okay.
This has got to be a record for any kind of vote countywide. I mean, I can't think of a single individual or a single measure that's come anywhere near to this sort of remarkable result. Julie, you mentioned the membership that you've been dealing with at the DSA. They have not historically been politically as active as certainly other members of the Labor Council that we know are longtime participants in the political system. The carpenters, the plumbers, SEIU, some of those folks, the operating engineers. So how much of this, and John, I'd like you to respond to this too, how much of this was kind of bringing along to the process new people? And how much does this sort of awaken them as a political entity, Julie?
I don't think they were ever lacking in political power or acumen. They just hadn't had to use it as strategically in the past as they had to this time. So they always had organizational commitment, they had organizational unity, but they had to use it this time in this given set of circumstances more strategically. So in the past, we being the Labor Council, we hadn't worked with, excuse me, the DSA or the OSS. So this was new territory for us. We hadn't traditionally worked within the law enforcement community. But as I said, when these folks reached out asking us, collective labor, for help, that is what we do. We work with individuals to ensure they have the wages, hours, and working conditions that all of us aspire to, that all of us fight for, and that they are contractually and legally guaranteed to have. So there were a lot of exciting things to learn about, people to meet, but the DSA and the OSS were always powerful. They were always a force. They just had to use it a little bit more strategically this time and bring more people to the table to ensure success. But this success belongs to them and it belongs to their membership. And they will have a continued commitment now that part 2 is done, going into part 3, making sure the sheriff's office is able to be rebuilt into the type of office that they can truly be proud once again to serve.
John, you've been involved in politics a long time. What was different about this campaign, in particular involving the DSA and the OSS?
Well, Julie's story that she just conveyed is kind of a great lesson, right, in politics, which is essentially you can create organizing opportunities around an issue. And what was amazing about this issue is that it brought factions from progressive to moderate to conservative together as one. And there's no better way to forge alliances or to organize than through an issue that brings people together. So look at the Board of Supervisors. We had arguably the most progressive and one of the more moderate people, leading here, right? We had our endorsement list, if you look at our website, is a full plethora of the breadth and depth of the county. And so that gives opportunities for alliances, for common cause, for common ground. And, it was a brilliant display of that leadership, like Julie's was able to put it together on the ground and inside the campaign. But if you look at it at the electoral level also, and at the elected level, that happened also. So it just, it was a textbook about, how you organize around an issue, you bring people together, you find common cause, and it works. And so that's what I took away here.
Julie, you're in touch with the leadership. They're representing the rank and file. We asked Eliot Storch earlier. It will be months, certainly weeks, quite likely months before the sheriff goes, assuming she doesn't heed the call to resign in the face of this overwhelming election. How fearful are you that there will be widespread retaliation and intimidation and misconduct by the sheriff against her political enemies?
This isn't my fear to appropriate. This isn't my workforce. It isn't my life. I'm not going to presume to speak upon what they think may be coming or where they may feel, thank you, where they may feel that there are challenges. But what going forward, it's folks will remain united. Folks will remain committed to the restoration of transparency, to reinvigorating. Bye. That's Elliot. I told him I was after him and then I needed him to leave so I could talk so you could hear me. Bye, Elliot. But there are a lot of unknowns, right? The only set timeline is the certification of the election and then the amount of time the board has to accept the results. Other than that, they are still creating the infrastructure for part 3, which is what I see as next step. The election is part 2. Part 3 is how we move forward with the results of the election. So it's the members, Eliot, any of our other DSA or OSS folks that come in, they can tell their own stories relative to the challenges and the fears they have with the work site. But right now, I think really the focus is, okay, accept the win, revel in the win, and then come together with that same level of commitment to moving forward with the next piece of the process, because the ultimate goal is rebuilding the sheriff's office and making it once again a place that they can be proud to work, that they can lift up as their employer, rather than something they look at and going, I'm really scared to go. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I need to feed my family, so I'm going to do it anyway.
John and Julie, you obviously campaigned against the sheriff. You've seen what she's had to say. I'm sure you followed it closely. Is there anything that suggests to you she might choose to resign, or do you think she's going to go right down to the last possible moment? John?
I mean, I hope she resigns. Let's save us all we're going to go through a lot here. The voters are clear. This isn't going to end well for her in any way politically. It's not good politically at all. She should resign. She should just save everybody the time and effort. My guess is, this is a guess, now we're out of campaigns and now we're into crystal ball. She's not. She's going to hang in there. But I hope that everything that Julie said was correct. But I hope that the supervisors put it on the front burner, go as fast as a process can let them go, and get her out. Voters are plain and clear. If she persists with legal challenges and going on, she's not going to get more money. She's just going to be more disgraced. She's not going to get another job. It's going to get worse for her, not better. Like, the facts are like with the other. If you just read the first report, it was horrible. Like, the facts are not going to change in this case. And so the voters have spoken. The facts are clear. Just get out.
Julie, your thoughts?
I don't know Sheriff Corpus. I don't have a relationship with her. I don't have the knowledge base to predict what she's going to do next. There have been a lot of unexpected pieces of the campaign, so I don't know what's next for Sheriff Corpus. But what I know is that our Sheriff's Office members, our DSA members, our OSS members, our unrepresented members will remain unified and remain committed to rebuilding the Sheriff's Office, because they're still there, regardless of what has been done to them, what they have endured, what they know they're going to continue to endure. They are still there. So the only thing that is important to me is continuing to support them and to give them the resources they need to be successful, and to give them the support that they need to push through what is step 3 of this multifaceted process. So I don't know what the sheriff's going to do. I can't control that. all that I can do is continue to do whatever I can wherever we, the collective we of labor, are needed to support these members and what they decide is best as to what's next.
You know, I've mentioned several times to friends, there were these books when I was a kid called Choose Your Own Adventure books, where you could decide which way you went. And it has appeared to me at every juncture where the sheriff had a decision point, she chose the ending that leads to her doom. And
Charles, you're right.
I would just say, if she were listening right now, that this is one of those moments. And there's one final thing she could do to maintain some integrity that would be a great act of integrity. And it would be to step down. That would be the thing to do. It would
100%.
respect the will of the voters. It would save a lot of time, energy, effort, and money. And it might indeed save a little bit of her reputation. Like Jon, I think there's not much chance that's going to happen, but that would be a tremendous,
this isn't going to end well.
good act of integrity.
Right? This isn't going to end well. She doesn't get a better consulting gig. She doesn't get, nothing ends well here. The longer she drags this out, the more she costs us time and money, the more she puts the workers through hell, the more she makes our county unsafe, the worse it is for her. And she's got to get that. It doesn't, dragging this out doesn't make it better for her or anybody else.
Julie Lind, John Whitehurst, key figures in the Yes on A campaign. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Mark, thanks a bunch.
Yeah.
Charles, good to see you again. Julie?
Good to see you, Jon.
So Charles, we've heard from a number of people. They'd love for this to go quickly. Short of her resigning, and there is nothing in anything she has said to indicate that she's even entertaining that idea. Now, that being said, politically, that's the position she should have taken. She should not have been saying during the campaign, if I lose, I'll quit. Because to the extent that she had any support, and it was pretty small, that would have been undermined, I suppose, by any statement like that. But is there a way to go fast? Or is that run the risk of, the old expression, I think it was Google, go fast and break things? Is there a path forward that can make this go away quickly other than her choosing to resign?
One of my favorite things to say when I was elected was, it's always interesting to watch folks from the tech sector come into government and try to run fast and break things into the brick wall that is government bureaucracy. So I think that there's a sweet spot where the board can take advantage of the 30 days for certification, define a process, move swiftly. There may be room for an independent investigator or an administrative law judge, as I mentioned earlier. I will tell you this. I think one of the most strategic mistakes the sheriff made was taking a swing at Ray Mueller. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 10 years of knowing him, it's don't bet against Ray Mueller, and also probably don't pick a fight with him. And it surprised me when she did that, because he had been one of her supporters early in her tenure and had worked to help her succeed. That was one of those choose your own adventure moves that I think was really, really a wrong one. So in answer to your question, I don't think there's a way to move as quickly as the DSA, the OSS, the men and women and men of the Sheriff's Department, and the people of San Mateo County would like them to move. But I think the board is going to see these results and understand that they need to move as fast as humanly possible without subjecting themselves to a successful court challenge. And I have faith that that's what they're going to do.
For the sake of the permanent record, we did invite Sheriff Corpus to come on, sent her the technology, the link that she needs to come on. We never heard back from her. We also invited Dan Stegink, who was the leader, such as it was, of the No on A campaign. He wrote the ballot measure and formed the Save Our Sheriff Committee, and we never heard back from him either. They are, of course, welcome to come on in a future edition of the game. It's a shame, because it would have been nice to ask them some of these questions and to hear their side of it, such as it is in an environment where, some of the questions would be tough. She would have been given a fair opportunity to respond. It is fascinating. Charles, you and I have known each other a long time. We've been heavily involved in local politics for a long time. I have never seen a coalition of people lined up against her. And we could go down the list of people who came out against her who were avid supporters of hers 3 years ago, including Noelia Corzo, who really, without saying so, saw this almost as an act of betrayal. And there were a lot of people whose feelings were genuinely hurt by how poorly this turned out. And I guess you don't recover from that. I mean, the county, has had its own share of political divisions. In this county, it's more about moderates versus progressives. And the progressives were heavily supporting her, but so were many of the moderates. But this time, everybody. I mean, there were some people on that list of supporters that surprised me, that were willing to actually say she should go, not just abstaining on a vote like the Democratic Central Committee, the Latinx Democratic Committee. This is really unprecedented in terms of political clout behind one position, isn't it?
I've never seen anything like it in the 40 or so years I've been paying attention. It's unheard of, as we talked about earlier. And yeah, you're absolutely right. When you get a group like Fix in San Mateo County that was so incredibly certain of this candidate and threw all their might, whatever it is, behind her, and was convinced that she was the answer to fix the sheriff's department, and to see them turn 180 degrees, that tells you something right there by itself. Other folks who campaigned, who I know walked door to door for her, spent hours walking door to door for her, absolutely vigorously walking door to door to get her out. I can't remember a time I saw that. There was the successful recall of Herb Perez in Foster City, but Herb's core supporters were still Herb's core supporters. This was way different.
Yeah. Are you surprised by the margin?
I am, honestly. I like you, I heard from the loud no people a little too much, and I thought maybe it was going to be, 58-60, which is still an outstanding victory, maybe 70. I did not anticipate 85%, and who knows, could be higher. But like I said earlier, and this is really in the weeds and political geek stuff, but progressives tend to vote late in San Mateo County. I don't know what this means in this election, though. In many elections, I can tell you how that's going to influence the outcome. In this particular one, I can't tell you which way that's going to drive the results, whether it's going to drive it up or down or not make a difference. But it will be interesting to see. I mean, if this thing cracks 90, that would just be incredible. It's already incredible. That would be unheard of.
We mentioned early on when you first joined our show, and thank you for doing so, that you are representing some of the claimants against the county, which is a precursor to filing a lawsuit because the county routinely denies the claims. How big is this problem going to be for the county? Warren Slocum, when he was still on the board, talked about millions and millions of dollars. Is it that severe?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to pull the Warren Slocum quote, and you beat me to it. Can you ever remember a time where you saw a sitting member of an elected body remark from the dais out loud publicly an admission that somebody was doing things that was gonna cost that agency millions of dollars? That was amazing to me. My jaw hit the floor. I don't represent Carlos Tapia, and so I'm comfortable talking about his case because I don't represent him. And for those who don't know, Mark was good about providing context earlier. Carlos Tapia is the president of the Deputy Sheriff's Association and was arrested under very curious and suspicious circumstances and then exonerated by the DA's office. His lawsuit, in my mind, alone is worth millions and millions of dollars. And there are tens of other folks who have been shuffled around, denied the resources they've needed, fired for very suspicious reasons. And all of that is actionable. Even if you're, let's say hypothetically, you were simply reassigned or demoted or fired, but somehow kept your salary, there's still damage to your reputation. There's damage to your career path. In some cases, there's loss of a pension that people were counting on. All of these damages can be enormous for the county. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, yeah, I think the county has a real problem already. And the sooner that she can be out, the sooner they stop the bleeding. And so that's another reason why I think you'll see the board move with with all due haste is because they have to know at this point that this sheriff is a litigation nightmare. She has done nothing but establish the context needed to convince juries that indeed acts that may have seemed benign before were retaliatory.
We just got a statement from Fix in San Mateo County describing this election as an historic step toward accountability and transparency in law enforcement. The board now has the authority to remove the sheriff, ensuring that no one is above the law. This victory marks a turning point for our community, and we commend the residents of San Mateo County for demanding meaningful reform. Just sort of briefly, if you can, what are her legal options? She's already filed a suit. She did make accusations that Mike Callaghy, the county manager, had interfered in her office improperly, and there's an investigation going on as regards that. It's been delayed because the person they first hired turned out to have to recuse himself from this issue. Put yourself in the shoes of her attorney. Putting aside the fact that you undoubtedly would advise her to resign, what are her options?
Well, listen, it's always difficult to put yourself in the shoes of another attorney who has access to information you don't have. So I'll start off by saying that, and I'll speak about it in the hypothetical.
Yeah.
If I had a client in a similar situation, the first thing I would do would be to try to avoid them giving any testimony under oath. Based on what I know about the situation, in situations like that, I think most attorneys are going to try to avoid having a client like that sworn in to give testimony. That's number one. Number two, I'm in a dicey situation here, Mark, because I certainly don't want to give any thoughts that might give her attorneys ideas. I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'll say that she can certainly, I'll say what I know she's going to consider, because she's already said it, which is she's going to probably consider taking action based on the idea that the quasi-judicial body, the Board of Supervisors, wasn't acting impartially, that they were acting out of bias because of statements they've made and things that they've done. She'll take a crack at that. Whether or not she can succeed on that, I don't know. I don't think so, but it's not impossible. I suspect she'll try to take another crack at somehow this is unconstitutional, although the Penrod decision certainly seems to say that it's completely within a county's ambit of choices to put this on the ballot and let the people decide if they want to give the board the power to remove the sheriff. And I think in Los Angeles and San Bernardino, I could be wrong, but I think it's permanent. I don't think they were sunsetting the power like the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County is. So that would seem to be an even stronger position for the board. So I think you can anticipate those types of challenges. What else she might try, I don't know. It's an odd thing to do in San Mateo County to attack someone like Mike Callaghy, who has such a good reputation, who goes out of his way to try to please everyone. Honestly, I think. I don't think anyone would disagree with me on that. Mike Callaghy is the type of leader who really wants to try not to disappoint people and to try to bring everyone into a big tent. And I don't know many folks who have a better reputation than he does. So for the sheriff to decide that the move was, whoever advised her, that the move here is to attack Mike Callaghy, that was bad advice, in my opinion. That was really bad advice.
Well, one of the characteristics of this entire episode is that she seems to be getting bad advice and then listening to it. This began well over a year ago, first internally when there were just constant complaints over everything from overtime hours to negotiations with the Deputy Sheriff's Association, interfering with Mike Callaghy's authority to negotiate with a represented unit of employees. It exploded into the public when the Board of Supervisors made it public and began the steps to hire Ladoris Cordell, the retired judge whose reputation is impeccable and does not have a reputation of bending over backwards to make law enforcement look good. So any suggestion that she was biased toward the Deputy Sheriff's Association is absurd for anybody who's known her. And I've known her for many, many years, back before she was ever on the bench, when she was basically a trailblazing attorney in San Mateo County. So that exploded with the sheriff, with the report by the Cordell report, which has routinely been described as scathing, and that led us to the point we're at now. The message from the public seems pretty clear that they want this over with, and the only question is what tolerance will there be for how long this might take to get this done right, and also done. And by done right, we mean survive a legal challenge. But it is. As we said at the very top of the show with Jon Mays, I've covered politics in this county since the 1970s, and I have never seen a controversy even approaching something like this. So it's a historic moment. It's a tragedy in many ways, and it's not over. We'll see what happens next, but certainly a clear message has been sent by the voters. Charles Stone, thank you so much for hanging in with us all night tonight, especially as I disappeared from the show for a while. I just got fed up with hearing the sound of my own voice. I should have checked my router before I ever went on the air. But in any event, thank you for your patience with me. Frank Bravo, our producer, thank you. On behalf of my partner, Bob Marks, who's not here, he's in Hawaii, and good for him. I want to thank John Whitehurst, Julie Lind, Jerry Hill, Eliot Storch. I want to again reiterate, we had invited the sheriff and the leader of the No on A campaign to come on. They opted not to do so, which is certainly their right. But a clear message has been sent by the voters. I think none of us expected 85% to be the prevailing number. And with that note, we'll thank you for being with us on the game tonight, and we'll see you soon. Take care, and thanks, everybody.